This is a very important question, and the answer is no. We are still very focused on the idea of ending the war. We have more progress to report on humanitarian access, and we know in talking to the Sudanese people that they do feel the urgent need for us to get food and medicine into areas of famine and acute hunger. And we have some progress there, but it's absolutely a priority for us to focus on the cessation of hostilities. In terms of the recent negotiations in Switzerland, we were able to make more progress on humanitarian access, including through proximity engagement with the rapid support forces and virtual engagement with the army. We believe it will be easier to get to the cessation of hostilities if we have in-person mediation, but it remains an absolute priority of the United States, along with our partners, to silence the guns. Not even close to enough.
Yeah.
We have begun to see over 10 million pounds of food and other important things come in. We've been able to get airdrops in a few areas like Kadugli, where populations are isolated of tens of thousands of people. We have so many more communities to reach with so much more food. We do hear that hundreds of thousands of additional aid is now moving into the region, where it would be in a position to come in through the roads that we did help to open with our partners, whether that's the Adre entrance or the Daba Road entrance. We're still working on access through Sinar. So one, we have communities that have not been reached with aid yet. Those communities that have gotten aid haven't gotten nearly enough. We need to see this not just continue, but expand in the coming weeks. We're going to stand with our partners around the world, including OCHA and the World Food Program and others, to support that aid reaching the people that are starving and the people that have acute hunger.
Yeah, thank you.
The purpose of the Code of Conduct is to give us an additional tool that we can hold accountable, not just the fighters committing atrocities in a group like the Rapid Support Forces, but also the leadership for a failure to take action to prevent those things from happening. What's important is not the signing of the piece of paper, but the change of behavior. We do appreciate that the RSF took the step and its leadership took the step of committing to the Code of Conduct. Now, obviously, the goal is to make sure that is being reflected in practice. We are shocked and outraged by the reports we are getting from Sinar of civilian deaths from shelling. We know that shelling continues every day, and we are engaged along with our partners from Switzerland in those conversations with the RSF. And we must see that change behavior in addition to the bombing of civilians from the army side. This was about restoring the idea that even in war, which we hope will end, even in war, the basic rules of the laws of war and international humanitarian law need to be met by both sides.
Their behavior?
Well, we are looking at the research of what's happened.
Yeah.
They have told us that they are going to report back on what happened. We do not expect that behavior will change overnight, but we do want to see that change of behavior. And having the information reported by many civilians is part of that process of documentation of abuses. You know, we were extremely clear with the SAF and the government delegation that the negotiations in Switzerland were absolutely about implementing the Jeddah Declaration. And the fact that they didn't show up made it more difficult to make some of the progress they claim to want. We know there were significant elements, particularly of the army itself, that wanted to go to those negotiations, specifically because they wanted to see the kind of progress that you noted. And failure to attend made that more difficult. But it is absolutely our intention to continue to push for the implementation of Jeddah, including the issue of the RSF pulling out from hospitals and schools and homes. And if that can be part of a comprehensive cessation of hostilities, that's even better. And we believe that was a missed opportunity for the army not to attend, but we did make the progress where we could. It's not up to me to speak for President Burhan. I think that it was pretty clear the Sudanese people wanted their leaders to go to the talks. We know that there was overwhelming support for participation. We know there was a lot of disappointment in not attending. But I also know that the SAF side right now is a very complicated coalition. Unfortunately, we have some political forces within that coalition that want this war to continue, whether for war profiteering off the suffering of the Sudanese people, or whether it's former regime officials looking for a backdoor to power. We believe in the core long-term sovereignty of Sudan. We believe in the importance of a professional integrated military under civilian authority and accountability. And we think that those who believe in those institutions understand the importance of coming to the table, getting an end to this war before it fractures further, before more external actors come in who are trying to destroy the country or play to their advantage. And we want to see this war ended now. Frankly, we think it's extremely important to push for a cessation of hostilities before the end of the rainy season, when we could see violence escalate. So now is the time for peace. We're talking to the full range of Sudanese actors every day, across the region. Virtually, we're talking to people inside Sudan, from the north, the south, the east, and the west. And so are our partners. When we were in Switzerland, we were engaging with a wide range of folks. Now, in general, we think it's still valuable to keep the ceasefire conversations separate from the political dialogue conversations, but both are important. The political dialogue really needs to be the Sudanese people determining their future. The ceasefire is an action between warring parties traditionally, but we know people see those as very much linked together. It's important for both of those to go forward. And I don't think the Sudanese people want to see the former regime have a seat at that table and have a path back to power. And I think we'll see how that plays out mainly in the political dialogue. Well, I think it's, what I'm talking about is some of the politics, I think, within the SAF and government coalition. And, I think that's really President Burhan's purview to be managing. And I think, we are hopeful that the dynamics will largely reflect the Sudanese people's desire to move forward with peace. And we think that can be achieved. This famine was a man-made famine. It wasn't created by a giant storm or a drought or a crop disease. It was created by two sides fighting. And while we do believe the SAF is an institutional military that has legitimacy, it is true that these two joined forces to overthrow the civilian transition that the people of Sudan wanted. And I think what people want is that future back, and that is that political dialogue process, which we absolutely support and is going on. The African Union has already been having meetings here in Egypt, where I sit now. They had the conference back in June, I believe. So those activities are absolutely proceeding, and we hope we'll have more progress and momentum soon. Well, first of all, the negotiations are happening. We've been able to proceed. This is 2024. We don't need people to participate in the same way. And quite honestly, we've seen too many Sudanese actors over the last 30 or 40 years play games with issues of invitations and all of this sort of thing, and use food as a weapon of war. And we were able to proceed with negotiations the way we did, and those continue every week. We meet as a delegation. Every day we're in communication with both the Army and the RSF as a delegation, trying to create greater humanitarian access and greater protection of civilians. As you noted, we have a long way to go in terms of getting food and medicine to those in need, and in terms of ensuring these codes of conduct are actually enforced. So much work that needs to be done, and we're continuing to do that with or without in-person mediation to end the war. We do believe that's primarily a question of political will, and we hope to continue to see greater political will for peace in these efforts. These are complicated issues, and I think what we're seeing on the outside of Sudan is a greater and greater number of countries who see this not just as a humanitarian crisis, but as a threat to regional stability, and therefore want to be partners in peace. That certainly applies to most of the neighboring countries that have taken in millions of refugees, and understand that particularly as you move into that second year, well into the second year of war, that's when it's not just a matter of surviving, it's a question of childhood development, it's a question of working, residency. There's an economy that kicks in at this stage of a war that starts to give it a momentum that nobody wants. So I think for all of those reasons, we want to get back to the peace table as soon as possible. Yes, to go back to negotiations. Yes, I think that's what the Sudanese people want. Again, we're already negotiating with them every day over things that frankly shouldn't be negotiated, like humanitarian access and civilian protection. We're also engaged with the RSF every day in those topics. But as you said, we know the only real solution here is to silence the guns and get back to that civilian transition. So we were disappointed they didn't come. We appreciated that they engaged on some important issues virtually. That effort will continue. And we really hope that the balance of power will shift in the direction of peace soon. No, the political track is very active. The African Union has already held multiple meetings of the high-level panel run by Dr. Chambas. Dr. Chambas was with us in Switzerland, playing a very active role as well on the humanitarian access side. We saw the government of Egypt, where I am right now, host one of the most inclusive political conferences since the war began, that produced a great deal of unity across the political actors on the need for peace, the need to end the war and get back to a civilian transition. So you're seeing a great deal of activity on that, as well as from the Sudanese themselves. So we see the political dialogue track as very active, and an absolutely essential part, not just of ending the war, but providing that path forward. Well, that's really up to the Sudanese people. And so far, the Sudanese people have been absolutely clear that they do not want the former NCP officials in power and in the dialogue. And that conversation, I'm sure, will continue to play out with the Sudanese in the appropriate forums. This war could end tomorrow. If President Burhan and General Hemeti decide to put the interests of the Sudanese people first and return to the civilian transition that was taken off course, we can see peace, and I know that's what the people want. And there are very important questions that are part of that, but that's what the kind of leadership we're hoping to see, and hoping to see through mediated talks. Again, we know that some people are trying to extend this war for either political profit or financial profit. And I think the Sudanese people will remember who those actors were as they go forward, and have been very clear to me and a much broader audience about this, about not wanting to be held hostage by this war to people that they've already decided with great risk to push out of political power. Again, this has been a Sudanese-led question in the dialogues. The African Union, that's between the warring parties, between the SAF and the RSF, as was debated for a long time before Geneva. That is how ceasefires are run, is between the warring parties. That is not something that gives legitimacy to the parties as invited. It's about the primacy of trying to do the practical work of ending the war. That's why we invited the RSF and the Army, and why we'll continue to do that for the ceasefire negotiations. We were very supportive of the fact-finding mission. We think its recommendations are extremely important to consider as we build up to the United Nations General Assembly, where we'll be doing a ministerial meeting along with many of our partners from the region and partners from Europe. And certainly we hear more and more Sudanese ask for this kind of an international peacekeeping force of some kind, whether from the United Nations or the African Union. We still think the quickest and best solution is through mediation and getting to a peace agreement that returns power to the civilian transition from before. And that's what we'll continue to focus on. But we know that the fact-finding mission laid out a lot of important recommendations to consider, including the peacekeeping efforts you note. Yeah, so again, I think right now we believe that all of these things need to be considered. We know that the political environment inside the Security Council has not been particularly inducive to Chapter 7. The core principle is very clear, that civilians should be protected. That is something that has to be respected as a matter of international humanitarian law, both by the existing authorities and by any militia group. We think the fact-finding mission laid out what we already know in terms of the level of horror and suffering of the Sudanese people, and that civilian protection mandate is not being met. And I think on the question of what will be the policy solutions to that, the United States will continue to look very strongly at the recommendations that were made, continue to listen to the Sudanese people, and continue to look for the quickest possible resolution to this conflict. Well, I don't know that it's necessarily a matter of punishment. I think for the Sudanese people, anything that is trying to protect civilians is seen very much as a positive thing. I think the question of whether or not we approach a Chapter 7 mandate is about, in part, whether all other options have been exhausted. We don't think they have been. We think that there is room to find a resolution to this conflict soon. We want to see the guns silenced immediately, and certainly before the end of the rainy season, when we know that violence could easily escalate from both sides. And we still believe that that is the right path right now, and we stand ready to play a core role. Obviously, we've worked closely with Saudi Arabia through the Jeddah process and continued through the recent Alps process, along with other partners in the region, including the Egyptians, where I sit now. We think that everyone has a role to play in this, and the goal has got to be to end this war as quickly as we can and make sure people are getting food and medicine who are starving and isolated.
Okay.
This is a common misconception. It's not a matter of starting again because we're still going. We really tried to redefine the negotiations into a space of where we can be doing this from anywhere in the world. You know, we need to rethink. Given the urgency of the crisis in Sudan, we can't just use the old models, which take weeks or months to get together for a round of talks. We do it every single day. We are trying to build on the progress that was made in Switzerland with the same set of partners. That delegation meets every week to talk about what's the next step on humanitarian access, what's the next step on protection of civilians, and how do we create more room for the cessation of hostilities. We also have those conversations with the broader set of partners that weren't in Switzerland. You know, that's the important thing, is the results. That's what we really brought in. President Biden and Secretary Blinken were very clear to me when we put together the talks. They said, find a way to make it work, find a way to get food and medicine to folks, find a way to end this war. And we are going to look at a broad set of tools of how to do that, because we know the Sudanese people are looking for greater leadership and greater input from the United States and others. They've been very clear with us about that, and we take it really seriously. So we're going to keep looking at every option we can at every stop on this trip. I mean, we're solving problems every day. In terms of whether we're going to bring a resolution to the conflict, again, ultimately that decision lies with the leaders of the RSF and the SAF. We stand ready to be part of that solution any day, every day.